Sorry seems to be the hardest word, or so sings Elton John. But in Britain, it seems to be one of the most overused words, whether we are sorry about the weather, sorry someone has had a bad day, or sorry that someone else has bumped into us. A recent survey of Brits found that the average person says sorry 8 times a day, and 1 in 8 people apologises up to 20 times a day. The readiness of the English to apologise for something they haven't done is remarkable, and it is matched by an unwillingness to apologise for what they have done. That's what Henry Hitchens, in his aptly titled book, Sorry, the English and Their Manners, wrote. But to offer a heartfelt, humble sorry for a mistake or intentional hurtful choice on our part takes courage. To accept that sorry from someone else when they have caused us pain takes grace. To forgive when no sorry is uttered takes a miracle, but a miracle that can become a reality through Christ. I want to take you to the scene of Calvary, known as the place of the skull, outside the city walls of Jerusalem. This place is likely to have seen many brutal executions, where words of abuse would have been hurled from the crowds and likely been returned by those being crucified. In many ways, the day when Jesus was nailed upon a cross was just like any other day. There was the jeering of crowds, brutal violence from Roman soldiers, and mocking from religious leaders. But the man upon the cross did not retaliate and rebuke with his final breaths. Instead, he cried, "Father, forgive." What a radical act of mercy from a man in agony. As the hatred of humanity surrounded and the darkness of the world closed in, Jesus cried out for forgiveness for those who nailed him to the cross, whether physically or metaphorically. But it was not just his words which declared forgiveness, but the sheer act of being obedient to crucifixion. This perfect man, who had no need to say sorry, opened a way by which all people can have their sorries forgiven. And he did it too, recognising that not all people would come to that recognition of needing to say sorry. There was a Sunday school teacher, and they just concluded their lesson and wanted to make sure they had made their point. She said, "Can anyone tell me what you must do before you can obtain forgiveness of sins?" There was a short pause, and then, from the back of the room, a small boy spoke up. "Sin?" he said. We all know the sinning is not the hard part. It is the saying sorry that can present the biggest obstacle. But the incredible thing about Christ is whatever we have done, however disastrous, damaging and destructive it may have been, we can be forgiven when we have the courage to say sorry. We can be reconciled to God when we recognise our failings. But we too can be reconciled in our relationships with one another when we recognise the power of forgiveness. I want to tell you the story of Richard Moore, a 59-year-old man from the city of Derry. At the age of 10, in the midst of the Northern Ireland Troubles, Richard was shot with a rubber bullet by a British soldier, leaving him completely blind. Richard always told himself that the person who shot him must have been an 18-year-old soldier who didn't know what he was doing. Yet 33 years later, Richard discovered the identity of his shooter, a 32-year-old captain with a wealth of military experience. But from the outset, Richard acknowledged that bitterness was an option, but it was one he chose not to take. He says, "I went to sleep, and next morning I awoke and got on with life." Despite what had happened to Richard, he chose to forgive. And in 2007, he chose to meet the soldier who had blinded him, Charles Innes. From here, a strong friendship was forged. And in 2010, Richard and Charles travelled to northern India to visit the Dalai Lama and share their story of forgiveness and reconciliation. Richard says this: "By forgiving the soldier, I am not going to get my eyesight back. But forgiveness can change the future, and that's what happened in my case." Richard and Charles's story of forgiveness gives just a small insight into how forgiving both others and ourselves can transform lives. Both reconciling humanity with God and reconciling brother with brother and sister with sister is the story of the cross. Within humanity are both impulses and capacities for revenge and for forgiveness. And within the animal kingdom too, peacemaking activities are extremely common. Chimpanzees kiss and make up, and it seems that many other species do as well. Of the species studied, only domestic cats have failed to show behaviour that reconciles relationships after conflict, which will not surprise anyone who has cats. Will we choose to embrace the impulse and capacity for forgiveness like chimps? Or embrace the impulse and capacity for revenge like cats? Or, of course, more importantly is the question, will we choose to forgive like our Father in heaven forgives us? There was a little boy sitting on a park bench in obvious pain. A man walking by asked him what was wrong. The young boy said, "I'm sitting on a bumblebee." The man urgently asked, "Then why don't you get up?" The boy replied, "Because I figure I'm hurting him more than he is hurting me." How many of us handle forgiveness like this little boy? We endure pain for the sadistic satisfaction of believing we are hurting our offender more than they are hurting us. When we get off the bench of unforgiveness, both parties can begin to realise relief from their pain. As Mahatma Gandhi said, "An eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind." Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who has seen the destructive power of apartheid, as well as the hope that comes from reconciliation, says this: "Forgiveness is the only way to heal ourselves and to be free from the past. Without forgiveness, we remain tethered to the person who harmed us. We are bound to the chains of bitterness, tied together, trapped. Until we can forgive the person who harmed us, that person will hold the keys to our happiness. That person will be our jailer. When we forgive, we take back control of our own fate and our own feelings. We become our own liberator." But forgiving others is not simply about freeing ourselves. It is about imitating Christ. In the familiar words of the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." Oh, how we need forgiveness. Forgiveness for the times we turn our back on God. Forgiveness for the times we intentionally hurt our neighbour. Forgiveness for the times we seek only our own comforts. And that forgiveness is wonderfully offered to us through Jesus, who cried, "Father, forgive." But the words of the Lord's Prayer make a declaration that we will be forgiven as we forgive others. Forgiveness is not just for us to receive, but for us to give away also. As C.S. Lewis says, to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable, because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. As I share these thoughts, I do not know what stories or situations or relationships or regrets come to mind. I do not know in what way you need to forgive or to be forgiven. But I do know that Jesus, who cried, "Father, forgive," knows it all and longs for you to be reconciled to him and to one another. To begin, I spoke of the courage needed to say sorry, the grace needed to accept a sorry, and the miracle needed to forgive when there is no sorry. As I conclude, I pray that wherever life finds you in these days, that you will have the courage, the grace, and the miracle you need to forgive and to be forgiven. I leave with you words of challenge from Ephesians 4, verse 32. Has God graciously forgiven you? Then graciously forgive one another in the depths of Christ's love. God bless you.